Tonight's video is going to look at hypotheses and how you form a hypothesis for your experiment. So, forming a hypothesis is, remember, step 3 of the scientific method. We need to identify our problem and then do some research to see what we can learn, and then we're going to come up with a hypothesis. So let's get started. So what is your hypothesis? And the best way to define this is your hypothesis is an educated guess about what will happen during an experiment. So what is a hypothesis? And it is an educated guess about what will happen during an experiment. Right? This is what we think will happen. It's what you think the answer to the problem that you identified earlier is. You identified a problem. This is your guess at the answer. So a good hypothesis should have 4 things. So parts to a good hypothesis. All right, there's 4 things that it should have. It should, first off, be a predicted answer to the problem. Right? If the problem is, can I get a paper airplane to land in a box on the floor, your hypothesis can't be cupcakes are larger than brownies. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't answer the problem. So it has to be an answer to the problem. The next thing your hypothesis has to have, it can be tested by doing an experiment. Right? So if I said chocolate chip cookies are more delicious than cinnamon oatmeal raisin cookies, that isn't necessarily something that you can test by doing an experiment. That's an opinion question, right? That's not something that we can test by doing an experiment. I might say more people prefer chocolate chip cookies to oatmeal raisin. I can test that. I can see if more people like them. But chocolate chip cookies are better is an opinion statement, and so isn't something I could test. It can be read and understood on its own. This means you have enough detail in your hypothesis that I don't need to look at the question to see what it's talking about. Yes, it will grow is not a good hypothesis, right? What is it? I have no idea. We'll look at some good and bad examples to make that a little clearer. And the last thing is it's written as an if-then statement. If I add water to plants, then they will grow. If I don't water plants, then they will die. All right? So if something happens, then this other thing will happen. That's the kind of good form for a hypothesis. And finally, just a style thing. Don't start with I think or we think. We know your hypothesis is what you think the answer is, so just go ahead and jump right into that. You don't need to say, I think if I water the plants, then they will grow. Just, if I water the plants, then they will grow. So here's an example of a good hypothesis. All right, so this is one good hypothesis, and we'll take a look at why. If, and I want you to write this whole thing in notes, if students exercise for 20 minutes per day, then they will score higher on their math test. All right? And so reasons why this is a good hypothesis. All right? You don't need to write now all the reasons to so, but let's go through it. Why is this good? It answers a question. Right? The question might be, will students score higher if they exercise? It can be tested in an experiment. I can have some students exercise, I can have some students not exercise, and then I can give them a math test and see how they do. It's understandable on its own. We didn't just say, if students exercise, then they score higher. Score higher on what? Right? If they do it, then they will do better. Right? I don't have any questions about what this hypothesis is saying, and it's written as an if-then statement. If this first condition happens, then this other condition will happen. And finally, let's take a look at a bad hypothesis. All right? So an example of a bad hypothesis. All right, and you need missing any one of those four will make this bad. No, it will not make any difference. All right, this is a terrible hypothesis. Why is this bad? Right, well, it probably answers a question. So it probably does fill our first thing. It's probably a predicted answer to a question. I might be able to do this with an experiment, but I don't know. I don't know enough about this hypothesis. It doesn't make any sense on its own. And that's the big problem, is it doesn't follow number 3. It's definitely not able to be understood without also reading the question. I don't know what the question is here. What is it? Is it the amount of time you spend studying? Is it the number of cookies you eat at lunch every day? Right? Is it the number of wheels on a car? All right? Who knows? It could be anything. All right? So that's why this is a bad hypothesis, is there's not enough detail. So to review, our hypothesis is our educated guess about what will happen in an experiment. It has 4 critical things that need to be part of that hypothesis: predicted answer to the problem, tested by doing an experiment, read and understood on its own, written as an if-then statement. And here are some examples for you to look at. Make sure that you write a summary at the bottom of your notes, and I will see you in class tomorrow.